Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions as folks continue to join. Thank you for joining us this evening for one of our programs in conjunction with Underwater at the Palo Alto Art Center. I'm Karen Kinzel, the director of the Palo Alto Art Center, and I want to welcome everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to thank some key folks for making this exhibition possible. First, I would like to thank the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation and all of our members and donors for their support of free exhibitions and free public programs like this one. I would like to thank our exhibitions team, Joseph Sachs, our preparator, exhibitions registrar Amy Cohen, and our installation crew, Leanna and Ivan, for their work to make this exhibition possible. I'd also like to thank Sharday Walker and Karen Kwan, who are behind the scenes in this webinar. For those who have not had a chance to see the exhibition, I would like to remind you that it's up until April 8th, so you have time. But I'm also including a few installation shots here that I'd like to kind of run through to give you a sense of the artist's work in context. This is in the gallery space. We have Liz's work on the right that she's going to talk more about, Adrian Siegel. In the foreground, her sculpture. We've got Jeffrey Downing's work in the background, as well as Linda Gass's photo mural, John Sabraw's work here on the left, Hugo Starkweather's work adjacent to it. Another close-up of Liz's work. She'll talk more in detail. And essentially right across from Liz's work, we have John Sabraw's work. So there's a nice conversation between both artists. And now to introduce our artists. Liz Hickok is a San Francisco-based artist working in photography, video, sculpture, and installation. She received her MFA from Mills College in Oakland. She earned a BFA and BA from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts and Tufts University in Boston. Liz combines low and high tech in her immersive photograph, sculpture, video installation, and most recently augmented reality works. And her works intend to close the gap between artist and viewer. Artist John Sabraw was born in England, an activist and environmentalist. His paintings, drawings, and collaborative installations are produced in an eco-conscious manner, and he continually works towards a fully sustainable practice. As you will hear, he collaborates with scientists on many projects, and one of his most current collaborations involves creating paint and paintings from iron oxide extracted in the process of remediating polluted streams. He is professor of art at Ohio University, whereas he is chair of the painting and drawing program. And you'll hear more about John in a moment. The way that this program is going to work is that each artist is going to present about their work for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. This is a webinar format, so you're not going to be able to unmute and speak to the group, but you can include your question in the Q&A tab in the webinar. So I'm now going to turn it over to Liz. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much, Karen. This is such a treat to get to talk to everybody at the Palo Alto Art Center and from probably all over the country tonight. And I'm really honored to get to talk in tandem with John, such a talented painter. I got to see his work at Qualia Contemporary a little while ago, and so I'm excited to get to share the presentation with him. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Karen kindly presented a few of the install shots from the underwater show. This is a close-up of one of the images in the show, but I am going to just give a little bit of context for those of you. I figure most of you are going to be in Palo Alto or in the general area. And so you may have seen a mural that I had up by Aziz Bagels in Palo Alto, and that went up through the Palo Alto Public Art Program a couple years ago. And as you can see here with the two figures, it was an interactive mural. Hopefully some of you got to experience that. It was a lot of fun to make. It was a collaborative piece with my collaborator, Phil Spittler, who helps me with the interactive component. You can see here just quickly, in case you missed it or just to refresh your memory, it's a augmented reality piece, which actually relates to the work in the show at the Palo Alto Art Center, where when you point your device at the artwork, it basically comes alive with sound and movement, and you can kind of move all around it. That's a little still from the augmented reality part. You might have also been to the Code Art Festival that the Palo Alto Public Art folks also put on back in October of 2021. That was another project I did with my collaborator, Phil. And it was just such a fun project. The whole festival for several days, or several nights really, showcased so many different artists' work. And Phil and I showed a large, very large interactive video that people could participate in by coming to this tablet and moving around, and you could see different views as the cityscape grew with crystals, which is part of a different series than what I'm showing at the Palo Alto Art Center, but was a lot of fun. And we showed the actual crystal sculpture as well during the exhibit. And I think that John was actually exhibiting at Qualia Contemporary at the same time. So I got to meet him during that event, which was really fun. Some of you may also be familiar with my Jello work. That's kind of what I became the most famous for, almost 20 years ago. If you Google San Francisco and Jello, you will find me online. And several people are, you're probably familiar with this work. And if we have time at the end of my 20 minutes, if I haven't gone over, I'm happy to come back to this series and talk about it more, because I know everybody always loves to hear how I make them and what they're about. And I'm happy to go into that more. So here's just a little preview of my San Francisco and Jello series, and you can find more of them on my website as well. I'll have the info for that at the end. So now I'm going to come back to underwater. I'm really thrilled to get to show this work. I actually started this series back in the summer of 2019. My partner, my kid, and I spent the summer in Brooklyn in the Gowanus neighborhood, and I'll show you some context photos in a few minutes, but I basically stumbled across the Gowanus Canal and the insane water surface. And it just kind of stopped me in my tracks and started a whole series, which I've been working on in bits and pieces ever since. This is from the opening night. I couldn't resist the pairing of color. And even though this work is completely different from my other series, it's straight photography. It's just photographs of a real thing happening in real life, as opposed to me creating sculptures that then I alter and photograph. This is straight photography. I've heard some people say it really does relate, the color and the light. It's almost like I've melted my Jello landscapes into the Gowanus Canal. Here's a close-up. It's really surreal, the surface of this water. This was, again, back in 2019. Here are the photographs in the show. What I love about this work is that it really defies scale. People, when you're looking at it, you just don't know how big this is, what is even happening. Some of them, like this one, look kind of like little universes in the sky, or if you get close up, it might look like cellular structures. Other ones, might look like marble. And I just love the way they're very abstract and kind of otherworldly. But since we're doing a talk, I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes of what is going on here. This is a photograph from the Smith Street Bridge in Gowanus in Brooklyn. And on many days that summer that I was there, you would look down and this is what the river would look like, the canal, would look like. Perfectly, quote unquote, normal. This is a group of people from the Gowanus Dredgers, which is a canoeing group, an activist group. And a lot of the time you would look out and it would look gorgeous like this. Just a little context for those of you who are familiar with Brooklyn and want to know. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is the Gowanus Canal right here. Can you, well, that's okay. You can see the Gowanus Canal in sort of the middle left. Hopefully you can see it with my cursor, I'm not sure. And you can see the surrounding neighborhoods are Carroll Gardens, Park Slope. Red Hook is sort of down where it says IKEA. And it gives you a sense of the general placement. Manhattan is up towards the top. And I was located right where the 9th Street Bridge crosses the Gowanus Canal. I was living for the summer just blocks away. You can see up here past my child, who is quite a bit bigger now. We took one of the canoe tours through the Gowanus dredgers, and past us you can see that bridge, which is a metro subway station. It's a really crazy spot. This bridge is one of the tallest structures around. It's very impressive. Anyway, so I would actually shoot to the left of where my child's head is. That was where I would photograph a lot of the time. So to give you a sense of scale, that was about how far away I was. Most of the time was from that bridge. Occasionally I would get closer, like coming to the edges, and photograph a little bit closer. And so a lot of the time, again, as I mentioned, I'd be on the bridge and I'd look down, and this is what it would look like. And actually, if you went there now, several years later, most of the time, this is what it would look like now. The water would look, quote unquote, normal. And other times I would look down and it would look like this. So this is what I saw one day when I was crossing the bridge, heading to do an errand over on the other side. And I looked down and I just couldn't even believe it. It was so surreal. This gives you a little bit more of a sense of scale, because you can see how the camera's, going off into the distance. So what I might have seen, but then when I would use a telephoto lens and zoom in, you would start to get to see things more like this. And when you print these, I could print them really large, and you can just get really close, and the amount of detail is just crazy. And so this image is kind of fun because you can start to see scale. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And again, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not. I should have asked that before we started presenting. But on the sort of lower left side, there's a leaf, and that helps give you scale of what these shapes might be like.
Liz, we can see the cursor.
Oh, good. Thank you. Perfect. And so this is another image where you can see a leaf in the middle. And this looks distinctly different than some of the other pieces, which starts to get at, like, what are we looking at? What is making up these crazy patterns in the water? Now, please take into consideration, I'm not a scientist. I'm an artist. I was really drawn to the visual component of what was happening. But of course, I knew that there was just ridiculous environmental factors going on. And as most of you probably know, or you may know, the Gowanus Canal is a Superfund site. It was declared so back in 2009, but the environmental damage started over 150 years ago. What you see here is probably bacteria, things like fecal contamination from sewage, but a lot of the other things that you'll see, especially the really crazy colors here, is from coal tar that seeps up from the bottom of the canal. So to give a little bit of a background about what's happened here, for those of you who don't know, is back in the 1860s, the canal was built for manufacturing so that boats could help deliver goods up and down this waterway in Manhattan. There were a lot of manufacturing plants, such as mills, tanneries, chemical plants, all dotted along this shoreline. They were also moving things like marble, brick, wood, etc. And all of that contributed to the contamination. But also, in addition to that, manufactured gas plants started appearing along the shoreline of Gowanus and in other places in the city as well. And basically, these manufactured gas plants took coal, they heated it up, and they used the gas to produce light for people's homes. And a byproduct of that coal processing is called coal tar. And that byproduct just got dumped into the surrounding area. And there was a couple manufactured gas plants right along the canal. And so that coal tar got dumped into the earth and into the canal, and now until recently, can be found up to 10 feet deep in the canal, this sludgy, thick product, and contamination from the chemicals from that have been found as deep as 100 feet deep. And it's just kind of ridiculous. And because it's sort of, this canal dead ends, there was no way to flush this contamination. And so the city then in the 90s decided to add a sewage, what did they decide? They built a sewer outfall at the head of the canal, sending sewage into the canal to help flush it, but it added further contaminants to the body of water. So now when it rains, the sewage overflow gets backed up and the fecal contamination is just ridiculous. And so environmental groups along in this area monitor the fecal contamination as well as the contamination from the industrial use from over 150 years ago. It all kind of mixes together. And when I was there in August on particularly hot days, these little, bubbles of coal tar would bubble up to the surface and create these crazy patterns. So again, this one shows more of the fecal contamination, which is just lovely. I particularly was often drawn to these just wild geometric forms that it would make that felt like abstract paintings to me. I just, you can zoom in on these and get lost in them. Again, going sort of from the macro to the micro. This is a close-up of the last one. And I'm not altering these. This is as saturated as it was. Again, these just crazy forms. I have a lot of ideas. I started this back in 2019, and as you can imagine, I got a little bit stalled through COVID and started working on other projects in the meantime, even though I printed some of these and had lots of ideas on what to do with this project. Oh, here's another close-up. But one of the things that I really wanted to do was to incorporate some of this data, some of this information about the project, about the contamination. And there's tons of it. You can go online and find just a plethora of information about the Gowanus Canal. As I mentioned, it was declared a Superfund site in 2009, but the work on the remediation didn't really get started until about 2020. They were doing other things, but the cleanup itself didn't start until after I had taken these photographs. And if you were to go back now, the worst part of the canal has been capped and dredged. And so you really probably wouldn't even see this as much anymore. So these photographs are a bit of a time capsule, but I wanted to add a sense of information to the photographs. And so what I did was I very conveniently have a partner who was in Brooklyn with me at the time. My partner does data visualization. And so they helped find data that the EPA collected about contaminants during one of the preliminary studies. And I have begun to add layers to these photographs that incorporate the information. So when you go to see the show at the Palo Alto Art Center, you can take this iPad and when you point it in front of the artwork, it makes it look like the photograph is melting down on the wall, and it starts to create a data visualization. And the data visualization is talking about the there we can see the surface water contaminants that the EPA measured, showing the ratio of the maximum detected amount, excuse me, to the New York State standard for drinking water. The carcinogen benzoaprine, I can't pronounce that properly, measured at more than 300 times the standard allowable amount for drinking water. It's just a horrible contamination, horrible carcinogen. And so you can see that in this data visualization. Let's go back a little bit. Oh, it's not gonna, there we go. You can see that, it turns into a data visualization to help sort of make a little bit more visceral some of the contaminants found in it. here is Phil, my collaborator, showing people at the art opening how it works. He's also explaining some of the other augmented reality projects we have in the area, which I can show you about. My hope is that I will take some of the other images, gather more data that's relevant to the local organizations there, and create more data visualizations with these works. I can imagine this one sort of turning into swirls and displaying other information. There are scientists collecting fecal contamination, which helps determine whether people can go boating in the area. I have also broadened the project locally, since during COVID I couldn't go to Gowanus and work on it there. And so I projected some of this imagery in Aslayas Creek near Hunters Point, which, as you know, Hunters Point is also a Superfund site. And I thought about this project in a way where we could take these images of this very visceral, visible contamination and display it larger than life in an area where there is also contamination, but that's just not as inherently visible and on the surface, and that it would help create conversations. And so I projected some of the video I captured on the site at Aslayas Creek. This is outside the art studios there. And it kind of flowed over the sidewalk and you could stand in it. And I hoped it sort of would help create this visceral feeling. And so I'd love to continue this project more. And I'm excited to show it at the Palo Alto Art Center because it's sort of reviving this project. I have a ton more photographs and lots more ideas, and we'll have to apply for some grants to continue this project. But one quick thing to try and wrap up quickly, because I think I'm ending soon, is I actually, the mural that you would have seen in Palo Alto and my regeneration series, which some of you may have seen in other areas, or if you come to my open studios, for example, or some of the artwork behind me, these were actually created during that time when my partner would see the contaminated water and the crazy water patterns and wrote a tool to mimic that crazy distortion that then I could apply to my existing images. So I would take a photograph of poppies and use their tool that they created, this program, to alter it and make it look like some of the crazy photographs of the Gowanus Canal. So that Gowanus series then inspired this series where I wanted to create images that were kind of more otherworldly than straight photographs of flowers. But yet also had a feeling of hope and joy, this is my even more recent project that I've been doing during the pandemic to help bring some joy and color to life. And this piece right here is about to be installed in Sunnyvale at their new Sunnyvale City Hall. So later in March, it'll be installed as a 5-foot by 9-foot framed print in their City Hall, along with 3 other artists, which is very exciting. And if you are in Los Altos, just as a little plug, you can go to the Paseo, which is near what used to be Akane Sushi and is now Yoshi Sushi. This is the information at 250 3rd Street in Los Altos. Oh, I actually have this backwards. It's Yoshi Sushi now. It used to be Akane. And this is also augmented reality, so you can interact with it similar to the piece in the show at Palo Alto Art Center. It's a lot of fun. At nighttime, it lights up and there's projections, and I highly recommend going when it's a little bit dark. This is my info. Ooh, I think I'm right on time. I'm happy later if people want to ask questions about the Jell-O. I have more images of my Jell-O and how I make it, and where I've shown it and things like that, because I know the Jell-O is always a lot of fun. So I can come back to that later if we have time during questions. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and end on that.
Thank you so much, Liz. And now it's all John.
Stop sharing.
All right. Let's see if I can make this work. Ooh, how about that? So, awesome, Liz, amazing. I do, after this, want to ask you questions and talk to you because I want to know if I can intern in your studio, basically. That's what I want to know. So for my stuff, first of all, thanks for the Palo Alto folks for the invitation to talk with you here today. And those of you who joined us virtually, thanks for being here. Hello. This 21st century life, this global, connected, digital, like sky is the limit kind of world that we built has been made possible only through the use of natural resources, right? And we know this: wood, iron, coal, water, etc. For only a few hundred years, just like a tiny fraction of the time that humans have lived on this planet, we thought that these valuable natural resources were abundant enough to exploit without restraint. But for decades now, we've known that they are not infinitely abundant, and that extracting them and using them in unsustainable ways has wrought drastic negative environmental, economical, and social impacts. Global warming, climate change, pollution, inequality, these are just some of the results. And I often get asked, why would the arts be focused on issues of sustainability and the environment? And my response is always because it's our job. An artist's role is to create catalytic experiences that in turn foster examination of the key events of our time. And this examination in turn can result in actionable realizations. So funny thing is, I'm actually not from Ohio. I moved here for a job at Ohio University, and I wanted to learn more about my home here. And so I went with a group of environmental faculty, and I learned about environmental issues in the Appalachian region, which is a place that has been blessed with valuable natural resources, but also has a long history of heavy resource extraction. Trees were cut down for timber. In fact, at a certain point, we basically had almost no trees left in the entire state of Ohio. And even though some of them were used for timber, the crazy thing is, if you look in this photograph on the lower right, a lot of the trees were actually just burned to create charcoal, so they could burn the charcoal to smelt the iron ore because it was such poor quality. It was a really terrible environmental thing. And here where I'm at in Athens, Ohio, in southeastern Ohio, throughout the first half of the 20th century, strip mining, which you can see on the left, and room and pillar mining for coal were commonplace. And in strip mining, sometimes called mountaintop removal mining, same thing, forests were clear cut, right? Soils were scraped away to get at the coal. And in underground mining, you can see there in the lower right, tunnels were dug and water was pumped out to remove the coal. Now, a few active coal mines do remain in the region today, but honestly, by the 1970s, most of the mining companies had moved on, leaving behind open mines, disturbed land, which you can see on the left, and really inadequate restoration. And some areas, like some of the forest has regrown, but it's very young and it doesn't have the biodiversity that was there originally, of course, right? But many of the underground mines continue to release toxic water to the streams. So when abandoned, many of these underground coal mines fill with water, and the oxygen and the water react with mineral surfaces that have been buried for like 300 million years. And when sulfides are present, and these are very common in Appalachian coal deposits, very high concentrations of sulfuric acid and iron are produced. This is one of the worst legacies of coal mining, and it is called acid mine drainage. It kills most of the aquatic life in over 1,300 streamed miles in Ohio alone. And on a field trip with this faculty group that was teaching me about it, we went to some of these acid mine seeps, and this is the first time I had seen any. And I've studied, the history of artist colors and pigments, and I see what you're seeing right here. I see these orange streams, and I learned that that orange comes from iron oxide sludge. And I was thinking, well, artist paints throughout history have been made with iron oxides. Earliest cave paintings, right, were made with red ochre. So, can I make some paints out of this acid mine drainage sludge? And nobody knew. They were like, oh, we don't know. So I took a jar back to my studio and I made absolutely unusable, horrible paint with it. Yeah, it's good. But a short time later, my dear friend Elaine Getz asked me if I'm interested in meeting her professor, who she's working with, because I need an artist's help. And I'm like, sure. So I went and I met this guy, whose name is Guy. This is Professor Guy Riefler. I met him for coffee at Wits, and it turns out that Professor Riefler had the same thought. And he was way ahead of me. He was thinking, what if this iron sludge could be extracted as a pigment? What if this iron sludge could be sold as a valuable resource rather than disposed of as a waste product? And also, what if treating pollution could be an environmental endeavor rather than a societal cost? Exactly what I was thinking. So an artist and a scientist both see the positive potential of a toxic waste source, right? And we're coming at it from different perspectives, different skill sets, audiences, and experiences. And my collaborations have led me to believe that artists and scientists share two things: curiosity and failure. Our curiosity drives us to pursue the most unlikely of paths, and most often our pursuits fall far short. But in these failures, we learn like one more clue and we're driven to push forward. So here we are working together, and this is the process. So there's a lot of acid mine drainage. This is what it looks like in Ohio. And so the idea is that we intercept the toxic acid mine drainage before it gets to the stream. And when it comes out, initially everything is dissolved, so it's actually pretty clear, but it's really acidic. So we need to take a base and neutralize the acidity. In this case, we use sodium hydroxide. And when we add it and neutralize the acidity, and that dissolved iron starts to form crystals. And those crystals, all they want to do is grab onto oxygen molecules so that they can form iron oxide crystals. And those are heavy, so they fall to the bottom naturally. And on top, we have clean water that we can return to the streams, right? And then the sludge that's left over, we dry it and we grind it and we just make a pigment. And literally, like that's all there is to it. Except for one thing. Neither Professor Riefler nor myself had any real idea of what safe water was or what made a healthy stream. We just didn't know. We needed someone with intimate knowledge of stream health and a deep commitment to like local communities and stuff. So very, very fortunately, this is our amazing partner, Michelle Shively, and she's the Sunday Creek Watershed Coordinator. She's also president of the Ohio Mineland Partnership and the chair of the Appalachian Ohio Water, and like a bunch of other things. She's amazing, but she really likes to actually be out in the stream, like doing sampling and stuff. Awesome. So our team of 3, it's good. We're ready to go. And this is the chemistry. It's really, really basic. It's not super revolutionary in terms of its base processes, but finding a way to extract this iron oxide so that it would actually be a valuable byproduct, that has turned out to be very complicated. And that is why Professor Riefler wanted my help. You know, what makes a good pigment? Hue, light fastness, grind, transparency, all that stuff. And I told him, like, yeah, I could work with you to do that. But I also thought that our project needed, honestly, beauty. We needed an expressive visual demonstration that tells the pigment story, its vitality, its symbiotic place in the grand scheme of things. So I began to use the pigment in a mix of other standard artist colors to make paintings that build a contemplative dynamic, like relating to the sublimity of nature, but also to the fragility of our current relationship with it. So what's funny is that I just, you know, I do art and I always think about art, but then I found out from Professor Riefler that when he goes to engineering conferences, the engineers always come up to him and go like, so you're working with an artist, you know what they're like, you know, what is that like working with them? Which is very, very funny. So I explained to the engineers the artist's mind this way, that these thousands of images that you see here, this is what the inside of my head looks like at all possible times. And all that's going on is my head is like, oh, here's the Ring Nebula. That's so huge. It's like light years across, trillions of light years across. And oh, but then there's that grand prismatic spring at Yellowstone, and it's only like 300 meters across, and diatoms are so tiny. And I just lay there at night waiting for inspiration from the divine forces of the universe. And then I make a painting out of it. And the series that began with these pigments, they're on aluminum panel, and they're made with a mix of acid mine drainage pigments and other pigments. But basically, the paintings began to change, right, as our pigment changed. Because let's say I'm thinking about mining effluent, like all these pictures of mining troubles, and I make a painting out of it. Excellent. Or if I'm like nautilus shells, contrails, you know, all that kind of stuff, make a painting out of it. It's awesome. But the problem was that initially our color rather, looked like this. This was our pigment, and it was really undesirable. No painting companies wanted to talk to us. Very, very terrible. But eventually what we did is we were able to perfect our process to get at least this kind of color in a raw state, which is really, really a lovely, lovely color. It's also really fun to paint with. This is a piece I did, that's the Hudson River coming right down the middle there. And actually, they dredged up a brick from the bottom of the Hudson River, and I ground it up and made pigments out of that too, and mixed it in here, it was fun. And so eventually what we did is we found ways to take our good product now that we had, this good iron oxide, and to even change the color further. So this is my buddy Matt Waddell's kiln out at his farm. And put saggers. These are like little trays for ceramics. These are saggers. We'll load it with our pigment. We'll fire it at different temperatures. And Matt, of course, will send me a text at like 2 a.m. and tell me how things are going, which is awesome. And after it comes out, instead of that orange, it turns this incredible red, which is also like really, really fun to paint with. And then, so being the artist, one of the things I do is I wreck a lot of equipment, and I'm sorry about that, but it just happens. So I'm working with a guy in his lab, and he's got this furnace, and I'm like, well, what happens if we take this furnace like all the way? And he didn't want to do it, but we did it. We cranked it up all the way. And the thing is if we take it to just the right temperature, that same orange iron oxide actually turns violet. It turns this color. Isn't it amazing? It's like, every time I look at it, I can't believe it's happening. It's crazy. And that's super fun to paint with, right? And here's some images from the Palo Alto show there. Those are the Dorodongos. And then these are really fun to make. They're just made out of clay and the pigments that we have. And you can see the violet closest to it. It's like super violet. And it's really fun to use, like in this setting. This is the painting that's in the show. And I don't know, y'all, it's a good time. Like, I love what we're doing. It's really fun stuff. So let's see, where am I at now? Okay, yeah. So here's the funny thing is that we had to get someone to really help us figure out whether this was like, you know, the right thing or not, whether we liked it, but did that mean anything? And so it's about this time that I actually developed a relationship with Gamblin Artist Colors. And I got to be honest, when I say I developed a relationship with them, what I meant is that I actually went to their factory in Portland, Oregon, and announced without an appointment, and I just barged in, and I was like, you guys, I got this, it's crazy. You got to talk to me. I got this stuff going on. And I remember the secretary was like, no one can meet with you. You don't have an appointment. You can't come in, all that kind of stuff. But actually Scott Gelatly did come out eventually. And we had like a 3-hour meeting. And ever since then, they actually make sure that our pigments are non-toxic in their labs. They make sure that they're light fast and stable and everything. And then they produce this. They produced 500 tubes in their factory of our color. And we released that in the Kickstarter campaign to artists around the world, which was amazing. We had 488 backers. And so these are actually paintings made by some artists from around the world who are now using our pigments to make their awesome paintings. And we have an Instagram hashtag, which is like hashtag Reclaim Colors. And so you can like hashtag your own painting and put it up there. And it's really growing. There's a lot of very cool stuff out there, which is just like awesome. So that was great. And all of this is good, but all of it also is still happening in the lab. And so we needed to prove this process can happen at an industrial scale. So we got funding from the Sugarbush Foundation and alumnus Dick Dickerson, and we built our pilot facility in Corning to demonstrate this process. And in the process of building this thing, we were joined by AmeriCorps volunteers and rural action members and residents of Corning. And Guy and I put together design teams of art and engineering students who worked together on many ideas for the plant, sourcing materials and how to build it. And then we also, our students met with the residents of Corning to create this art wall that was based on what the residents of Corning liked about themselves and their town and their identity. And that made this, you know, nobody vandalized this wall in 2 years, which I couldn't believe. So I guess we did pretty good with that, which is awesome. But this is the plant. It's really cool. It looks like this. And we've moved it to our new location now as well, which is just awesome. But at the time we were like, okay, we got a tiny bit of funding. We built the test facility, but is there actually a big enough market for iron oxide pigment? Because we got to sell it. We have to sell like thousands of pounds of this stuff. And it turns out there is, like, there's a really, really big market. There's a long history as well. Many of you probably already know other cultures and other countries where they've used mining effluent as paint. This is one example in Finland, Sweden, right, from their copper mines. But you can see on the right-hand side, and these numbers are a little bit old. These are pre-pandemic numbers. And I'll tell you what, during the pandemic, the importation of iron oxides in the US skyrocketed. So the use of it is incredible. We're going to be producing about 6,000 pounds a day, and that's really less than 1% of the market. So yeah, it looks like we can do it. But then Gamblin was like, yeah, this is awesome. We want more pigment. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. But the problem is our plant wasn't built yet. It's still not built yet. So what we do is we do the old fashioned way. We go out with buckets and volunteers, and we go out to this. Look at this. That's right out of the seep. So we scoop up all this deposited iron oxide. We process it. It's a bonkers thing that we do, and then we ship it to Gamblin. This is Gamblin's factory. This is the violet that you saw before being made. It's so delicious, so amazing, really good stuff. So they were like, yeah, we want to make this into a set. And they did. Look at this. They made this set, which is awesome. You can buy this in the stores right now. Reclaim Earth Colors. They donate proceeds back to us so that I can actually pay students to work for us, which I think is generous. We should do that. And then, but the thing is that it was released on March 20th of 2020. So we didn't quite get the fanfare that we were hoping for, I'll be honest, oh my gosh. But we're in an amazing place now, where just this last fall, we got permission to have a request for qualifications. We had a commitment from the Abandoned Mine Land Fund for $3.5 million. But now we've gone through the process of getting a company that specializes in building very large scale treatment plants. And so this is Truetown, Ohio, and this is where we're going to build it. You can see on the right in that schematic where the black rectangles are in the upper right-hand corner, that's where the plant's going to be built. Over 1 million gallons a day of this acid mine drainage pollution comes right out of this. And that's almost 7,200 pounds of iron every day. It kills the next 7 miles of the creek. And this is where we're going to build it. This is our team. We're out there. We're testing, pulling out the iron oxide and testing more of it. We now are waiting. Within the next 2 weeks, we will have approval to do this. And if we do it, we break ground in May, and we have $20 million to build this full-scale treatment plant so that by 2025, we are intercepting over 1 million gallons a day of pollution that will not go into the streams. The streams will go back to health within the year due to seasonal flooding and everything else, right? Amazing stuff. Woo! So this is where we're at. It's crazy. And I've been thinking primally more about the raw materials that are associated with our pigments. This is some coal pieces that I've done recently. Each of these natural forms gives us a glimpse into the connectivity and the inner structures of the universe, which of course is also our own inner structures, and maybe a clue to the construction of our consciousness and things. This is how I think. This is my mind. This is what happens when my brain goes off. And so one of the ways that I think about these structures and processes is that they can all be connected to vibrations, like pure energy, superstring theory, all that kind of stuff. And of course, vibrations can be connected to sensation and speech and hearing and other brain processes as well. These are just some paintings that are utilizing the pigments that I'm showing you. And those brain processes, of course, they're emotions, to be sure. And those emotions can be connected to moments of beauty and joy. And honestly, of course, that's art, right? That's what we do. That's art. And the function of art is to reveal these connections, right? And spur conscious responses to it that drive our great goals, that make us feel alive and useful, and that we have purpose during our time here. And the evidence is all around us. I think about the fact that honestly, it was just a few years ago that almost no one believed in our project. We couldn't get funding. Results were less than expected. Setbacks, our progress was slowed. But now I understand that like a single particle of positive impact has the potential to lift a whole ecosystem. And I think about the fact that our tiny project in one little stream actually connects directly to the other 7,000 tributaries that feed into the Mississippi River. And from there, they exit into the Gulf and join the global currents. And so maybe our one little bit of positive impact can reach all the far-flung parts of the world. And so I am actually working to expand the infiltration of art into non-traditional areas even further. So this is a painting I did that was in the Palo Alto show, where I met Liz in a parking lot, which was very cool. And this actually contains plastic particles that are made by a Menlo Park company out there called Novoloop, with two astonishing scientists that are perfecting a process to take out of the waste stream of the Bay Area unrecyclable plastics and turn them into virgin plastics. And this is Miranda Wang and Jenny Yao, amazing people. And then I also got to work with Draper Lab, and this is Ashley Beckwith, a researcher there, who is using the Monterey pine to generate these kind of baths in a lab at MIT, where we could actually grow tree fibers in batches in just like big vats so that we could make paper out of it without having to cut down any trees. And so I used that in this painting as well, because the Monterey pine, of course, is a hugely important habitat for the monarch butterfly, So all these things, these satellite images, these maps, all these things, I mean, I know that we're We're programmed as human beings to be cognitively aware of related visible and visceral interactions. And this making of connections, sometimes it's called pattern recognition. And it's one of the traits that has supported our success as a species. And that's why I'm looking at these here, this is actually a laser etched coal mine map in one of my recent paintings. And I've been laser etching satellite images of cities and stuff. This is sort of the process where there's a lot of poured paint, and I'll put it through the laser etcher and etch out, in this case, a coal mine map, and fill it in with different colors and then sand it back out until it becomes, the paintings that are going on here. Yeah. So I'll wrap up by just saying that, you matter. And I don't want anyone to discount the moments that you value. I don't want anyone to discount your awe and your inspiration and laughter, maybe because it just doesn't seem to be directly furthering the science or economic or even social progress, right? And why? Because what I've learned is that doom and gloom are not the reality of climate justice work, of sustainability endeavors. No, the truth is that what I have encountered in working with so many others on these issues is the collective working mode is joy, camaraderie, and affirmation. And we experience moments of awe and beauty and love, and those are also valuable to our success, which maybe just seem the opposite of cognition and instead maybe pure emotion. But those two innate responses come together when we make and experience art, right? And that's why I'm less interested in art creating awareness, because some people may choose to bury their heads in the sand, but there's not a whole lot of folks left on the planet who are not aware of climate collapse. Instead, I think we need to instill usefulness, bring as many people to work as possible collectively in however a small time commitment they can. So as many as possible can experience firsthand the affirmation of what it means to work collectively, collaboratively. Instead of throwing billions in subsidies to already profitable fossil fuel companies, let's invest that money in citizen science, citizen art, and citizen activism. Let's not worry whether this citizen art or science or activism is perfect or whether it's right, whatever that means. Let's just validate our humanity in all of its beautiful variety and imperfection. And as citizens find their voices in new ways, let's work to make sure that these voices gain access to the conversation, to the money, the influence. If all manner of people from all manner of professions and experiences and cultures felt that they too could contribute, that they were useful, that their ideas didn't die in a Reddit spiral, but rather could find access to those with the means and the modes to fully consider them, then maybe apathy can be abated enough to coalesce action by the masses and reprioritize our leaders' efforts. And I think there's only one way to find out if it's possible. So let's get to work. That was the end, by the way.
Oh, I'm frozen. Oh, sorry about that. I just froze all of a sudden. That was totally inspiring, John. Thank you so much. I love that. Joy, camaraderie, and affirmation as a vehicle towards significant change. Thank you both so much. I want to encourage folks to include their questions. I see we've got a couple kind of technical questions for John here, but please include your Q&A in the Q&A section. I was excited to see connections between both of your works, connections around obviously water, connections around technology and the use of technology, connections even around coal appearing in both of your works, and also significantly collaboration. So that is the question that I have for both of you. You are both collaborating with non-artists, obviously to great impact. I wonder if you can kind of speak to some of the opportunities, which you likely already shared, but also some of the challenges. I mean, these are individuals who are not coming from an aesthetic perspective. I wonder if you could talk about that, any tensions that have emerged in that process.
Yeah, you want to jump on that, Liz?
You can start.
um, uh, so I think I'm to blame for most of the tension when it happens because I get to make what I want. So when I come in here, I'm like, it's blue, and I grab blue and I go do blue, and or whatever. I'm like, I'm gonna hammer this, I'm gonna saw that, I'm gonna whatever. And when there are when there are processes that have to match expectations of either a regulatory agency or any other kind of thing, that pace of moving towards those goals and having to hit those things is really different. And I think I'm better at it now, but I think early on I spent a lot of time being like, let's go. And they're like, okay, hold on. I'm like, no, let's go, because I'm not afraid to break things. But that is why I don't build bridges, because that's not my expertise. So that creates some tension. And from my experience, also the scientists are really, they're very aware of the responsibility that they have and how they have to communicate that responsibility. And so they are much more tentative in taking those risks. So it ends up being a really rewarding and very, very interesting back and forth between those two things. But initially, early in collaborations, I find that even though I've had a lot of collaborations, if it's a new one, there still is that early phase where those two things, for me, that's kind of where the tension rides. So.
I'm just blown away by what you're doing, John. I mean, it's just incredible to see all the various collaborations you're doing, but all the progress you're making. I can't even, like, I'm just awed by the fact that you're having paint mass produced by Gamblin and then making a factory. It's just like mind blowing and so inspiring. I love it. And the fact that you get to work with all your students to do all of this work, and it's so interdisciplinary. It's amazing. So inspiring. For me, the main collaborator, I've had two different collaborators that I work with a lot. One is Phil Spittler, and he is a very creative person. He's, definitely part of the art world, and he helps me with the augmented reality and the technology side of things. And he's like just been a delight to work with, and I couldn't do it without him. And he helps sort of me expand what I can imagine doing. Like when we worked on the code art project, the projection, that was really fun. And then my other collaborator has been my spouse, and they are in technology and data visualization, and they have a good sense of creativity and visual, what might work and what might not. And so it was actually a pretty smooth partnership to create the data visualization for the piece in the show. And we kind of had the idea, and it worked fairly seamlessly. I think where I get stuck after that is like, well, what next? And who should I work with next? And there's all these possibilities and all these organizations. And there's so many great organizations in Brooklyn. And I've talked to the Gowanus Canal Conservancy folks there, and they're doing amazing things. And the Gowanus Dredgers, they commented on one of my recent Instagram posts about the show, saying, "Oh, you got to come and see what our underwater drone camera is recording, in the canal." And I'm like, yes, let's do that. Without being in New York, it makes it a little bit trickier. So I think what I need to do is set up a residency there. And, there's all the EPA folks, there's the people doing the dredging, there's so many different collaborators. And so I'm sort of inspired by what you're doing, John, and need to figure out what to do next. Carrie, my partner who does the data visualizations, is like, well, for the next one, I really want you to talk to the organizations and find out what they want, what's useful for them. And so that's sort of the next step, is to start working with them. So I feel like I'm still kind of in the beginning stages of this project, even though I shot the photographs a little while ago. So yeah, we'll see.
Excellent. Thank you both. Rachel in the chat has a question for John about what you are using as a binder when you're working with dry pigment.
Yeah, anything I can get my hands on. So like any of these things, But basically, for the dry pigment, we do initially some testing. We got to make sure that everything meets standards. So mostly what we're doing is we'll come in and we'll use like oil binders. So in this case, we'll do drawdowns and stuff. And basically, typically we use an alkali refined linseed oil, because then when you're doing drawdowns, that gives you like the best sort of consistent testing that you can have, right? Binders too, if you're going to use acrylic, basically what the difference, and this is why I had to learn the hard way, I couldn't make paint forever. And I finally figured out that the oil loves anything. You can grind almost anything up and make oil paint with it, whether it's light fast or not is another story. But acrylic, the pH has to be dead on. So we actually use Guerra Paints in New York, has been awesome. So they have this stuff that's called disperse water. And disperse water is essentially like a surfactant, and it makes the acrylic, it makes the pigment rather want to stick to the acrylic. So if you're going to make acrylics, then you can use anything after any acrylic meaning after that. But that disperse water, it is a game changer. So if you can get that, use that for sure.
Excellent, thank you. No more questions. Encourage people to put the questions in. I have more questions, so I'll just keep going. My question is related to developing a sustainable studio practice. I would imagine that we have artists on this Zoom. Certainly there are other artists in the underwater show who've made a commitment to a sustainable practice. We have a ceramic artist in the show who is doing a sustainable ceramic practice, which is challenging. Just a question for you, John, around where do you start if you're looking to be more sustainable in your artistic practice? Where are some good places to kind of start to find out how to do that?
That's a good question. And it's kind of funny a lot. Sometimes when I get interviewed or when they write articles, they don't get it right. And they're like, oh, he has a sustainable practice. And I don't. I'm working towards a sustainable practice. Aspects are sustainable. I'm making it more sustainable, but to claim that working with acrylics is sustainable is complete and utter caca. So what I do is I actually started with the basics. I honestly went back to like zero. So I try to make sure that everything I do is the most efficient possible, right? That begins with where do I get my heat from? Where do I get my water from? How much water am I using? How much can I reuse, etc. And then there are all kinds of other processes that are very, very simple. Like if you're working with oil paints, unless you're using cadmiums or other things, they're really not that harmful. They're not that toxic. So we're lucky in that regard. And linseed oil itself is not necessarily draining the environment in the way that some other products are. But the solvents that you have to use, those we have to really contend with. So you could actually, I set up a system where I have all these different jars and they're all on a line. They're always using the same order so that when you clean your brushes out and stuff, you get dirtiest to cleanest. And once the dirtiest one is too dirty to clean your brushes out with, set it aside. And in 2 weeks, all of the stuff will fall to the bottom and you'll be able to recycle all the stuff on top. So I have not bought new solvent for like a decade. It's not necessary, right? Other than that, the only other thing I'll say is that what I've been so lucky to do, that Gamblin agreed to actually work with us, is it's given me a kind of a voice where, and this is where all of y'all artists doing anything you're doing can do, we got to pressure our manufacturers. You pressure the manufacturers to produce products that are sustainable in the 3 ways that we want sustainability, right? We want sustainability environmentally, economically, and socially. So that includes what kind of pigments we're getting and where they're getting them from, and are those people compensated fairly? Are they treated fairly? So the changes in the last 10 years, and Liz, I'm sure you know, in the last 10 years, the changes of where we get our products from and what the dialogue is around that and what kind of efforts we need to have towards sustainability, that has changed radically, and just radically in the last 10 years. So, let's keep the pressure up. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Well, we're now at 6 o'clock. I think that is a great place to begin, or to end, I should say. And also it's a great call to action. I want to thank both John and Liz for sharing their work with all of us tonight, and being part of the underwater exhibition. For those of you who haven't seen the show, once again, encourage you to do so until April 8th. Thank you again. This has been incredibly inspiring, and I really appreciated the chance to hear from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much.